welcome to the 5th episode of Lady Lazarus. I can't believe we've made it this far, but I've been really enjoying it, and I hope you have been too. I hope you've had a good past week. Spring is slowly coming. Yeah, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to mention that I am recording this on International Women's Day, March 8th, and I am so grateful to have so many powerful, inspiring women in my life, especially my mom, both of my grandmothers, my mentors at school, like my voice teacher, my vocal coach. Just have so many strong women to look up to in my life, and I'm very proud to be part of this community of amazing women, and I hope that all the girls and the women listening to this know that you are important, you are valued, you are loved, and you could do absolutely anything you put your mind to. So, with that being said, this week's topic is definitely more personal than what I've shared so far, and I'm not gonna lie, I am a little nervous about it, but it's something that's very important to me and something that I think is very important to be honest about and to talk about so that other people feel empowered to open up about their own experiences. So with that being said, this week's topic is about my body image journey and my relationship with food and how that's changed over the years and what I'm doing now to improve those things. So before we get into the topic, I just want to put a massive trigger warning. If you're uncomfortable hearing about body image or food, anything around that sphere, just feel free to stop listening to the podcast right now. I have 4 other great episodes that don't have those trigger points in them at all, so feel free to go listen to a different one, but no pressure to stick around. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable or anything, and I am going to be quite candid about my experience, so please feel free to click away now if that's something that's going to make you uncomfortable. And with that being said, how I'm going to structure this episode, I guess, is mostly it's just going to be me talking about my experience and kind of the things that I've gone through over the past few years, what I've struggled with, what I've overcome, what I'm still working on. And then I'm going to get into some statistics and research and some things that I'm hoping to see change or improve in the coming years that I think would be really good in terms of helping people repair their relationships with food and improving their own body image as well. So, without further ado, let's get into my story. So, the first time that I kind of felt insecure in my body was around grade 4, which was pretty young, like I would have been only 9 or 10. And I wore a school uniform literally from kindergarten to grade 12. And in grade 4, we started wearing skirts and we'd have knee-high socks, but most of the time people would like roll them down so you could see your whole leg. It was all exposed. Pretty much the skirts were above the knee. And I remember being really upset because I was teased a few times about my leg hair and my arm hair. And it's just a genetic thing, like having dark body hair kind of runs in my family. You know, all the women have darker hair than maybe some other people that I know, which is fine. And now I really do not care at all. But when I was younger, being teased like that about something that I didn't even realize was quote unquote bad was really upsetting and really hard to deal with. So I started shaving my legs from the time I was about 10. And I remember just feeling a huge relief after I had shaved the first time. I just felt like I finally could fit in, I guess, and there was a sense of me being able to have that control over my body and that control to fix something that society was telling me was inappropriate, or the people around me were telling me it was inappropriate, even though there was literally nothing wrong with it. And then from then on, I think I started noticing my body more around age 11, 12, just before I became a teenager. And that definitely correlates to when I started using social media and when I started consuming more media in general, like watching more Netflix and just seeing a lot of celebrities and people who always looked a certain way, and that appearance was always a bit different from how I looked. Everyone I saw was quite slim and skinny. I probably didn't see anyone on social media in terms of like celebrities or influencers who was above a size 2, to be completely honest. And that was definitely really hard because as I was starting to go through puberty, obviously my body was changing and I, started developing and getting bigger hips, getting a bigger chest, things that were completely natural and ultimately up to genetics that I couldn't control. And I just developed a lot of frustrations and insecurity around the fact that I wasn't looking like these models that I was seeing on my Instagram or seeing on Tumblr. And also around that time, I'm just realizing this now, I hadn't really thought of it before, but it's kind of well known now that especially Tumblr in the early 2010s was a really toxic place in terms of glorifying eating disorders and glorifying very, very skinny figures. And that was around the time that the thigh gap became a huge trend as well. And I just remember feeling awful about myself and feeling like, I was never going to be able to live up to these standards that were being set by the people around me. And it seemed like so many girls I knew, even at school, were so much skinnier than I was, even though I was by no means overweight or obese. I was just, had a bigger build than other girls. And so as I started high school, I was always quite an active kid, and in my early teenage years, I was quite active. I was a synchronized swimmer, I played field hockey, and then I got really into volleyball. But I always found that no matter how much exercise I did and no matter how healthy I tried to eat, I never could get my body to look the way that I wanted it to or the way that other girls' body looked. I remember, especially when I was playing volleyball, just because in that sport, kind of the standard uniform is wearing like tight short spandex shorts and then your like top, and if you're playing a game, your jersey. And I remember probably every day before I would go to practice, I would look in the mirror and look at myself wearing the spandex shorts and turn to the side and see my like small stomach pouch like poking out and feel so awful about it. Even though, as I've learned all these years later, it's completely natural to have extra fat around the bottom of your stomach or your torso area because it's meant to protect your internal organs, especially your reproductive organs, so that when you eventually are pregnant, as is the goal with any human or animal, I guess, is to eventually be able to have a child, your body is protecting you from any sort of damage that might come to that area. So having a flat stomach is actually not what we're genetically meant to have and what our bodies are meant to be able to sustain, I guess. So I wish I had known that back then, and I probably would have felt a lot better about the fact that I had that extra flab down there. But anyway, that was really frustrating. And so I also ended up dislocating my knee 3 times in the span of 2.5 years when I was just starting high school, finishing elementary school, which led to me kind of having a limited amount of sports that I could participate in. And eventually, a couple years after that, it ended up resulting in me no longer being able to play volleyball just because I had a scare of almost dislocating my knee again, which would have meant I probably would have had to have surgery. So that was like the last time I played a formal sport and got like consistent exercise that way. But going back to around age like 13, 14, the first time I think that I started experiencing issues with food specifically, beyond just having problems with my body that I felt like I couldn't change, was when I went on exchange when I was in grade 9. So I went to Scotland for 3 months. It was a great experience and I made a lot of friends and people that I'm really grateful to have met. But a negative impact of me going on exchange was I think I developed a lot of social anxiety and stress about going to meals because they were such a social thing, and I felt like I didn't necessarily fit in, and I just got really stressed about having to deal with that sort of social situation. So for probably like 2.5 of the 3 months I was there, I just didn't go to dinner. I didn't eat dinner. I would have like a piece of toast instead just in the dorm room, but nobody was forcing me to go. Nobody was monitoring if I was going, so I just wouldn't go to dinner. And I definitely felt guilty about doing it, and I knew that I should have been eating 3 meals a day, but the anxiety that I had about the social aspect of it just stopped me from doing it. And eventually I did notice that I was losing some weight, and I was doing a lot of walking around the campus as well, just because it was so big and we had to walk from class to class, usually like quite a bit farther than the normal high school. So I noticed that I was definitely losing weight, and not gonna lie, like it did feel good to see myself and think that I was slimmer near the end of my experience than I was when I got there. So I didn't feel like it was a huge issue, and I came home and I didn't really keep skipping dinner because I knew that obviously my family would notice and it wasn't really a sustainable thing to do. But that was my first experience of restrictive eating. And then I think after I got back from exchange, that was the end of grade 9, and then I went into like grade 10, grade 11. That's when a lot of girls, I think, start developing unhealthy relationships with exercise and food and their bodies, as you kind of start realizing that there are so many people out there who are always slimmer than you are, who always have a more quote unquote ideal body than you do. And so I found that with a lot of the people I was hanging out with, conversation constantly kind of came back to criticizing their own bodies, talking about their workout routines or things that they were doing that were like definitely extreme to lose weight, like just give themselves the ideal body type that society was pushing on us. And people were definitely very open about talking about skipping meals or like not eating a lot and things like that, which was definitely really bad. And I think subconsciously people were definitely looking for validation of somebody saying, you know, you don't need to do that, like you're beautiful the way you are and things like that. But for any teen girl, there's so much pressure to look a certain way, not even put on you necessarily by other people, but just by yourself and by you comparing yourself to what you see online especially. So it was definitely hard because I felt like I constantly needed to be in the same boat as all these other girls and be working out constantly and eating super healthy or not eating at all and losing weight and like getting as close to this body standard as I possibly could. So yeah, like I mentioned, around that time was when my knee issues took me out of doing volleyball and other sports, and I didn't really get into any sort of consistent exercise after that. I think that partly that was due to, you know, me developing a lot of frustrations as a young teenager about exercise not actually working the way I wanted it to. And I think even now I'm still trying to build a healthy relationship with exercise where I do it because it's good for my body and my mental health and not with the end goal of trying to lose weight or change my appearance. It's definitely something that's a learning process and I still struggle with for sure. And I found that I just started hating having people comment on my body, whether they were praising me or criticizing. I'm obviously not going to name names, but I've had people that are really close to me say things about my body that have really hurt. And even harmless comments can really leave a lasting impact. Like I remember one time somebody who I was really close to made a comment when I was eating dinner. I had like a decent amount of food on my plate and they looked at me and said, "Oh, big girls gotta eat." Even though it was just one short sentence and one like offhand comment, it's literally stuck with me all these years to this day. And I've just always felt so just uncomfortable when anybody's made a comment about my body. I feel like, especially now, I'm so much more than what I look like, and I don't need people to point out my flaws or things that are good about my body according to the normal societal standard. I hate talking about my body. I hate when other people talk about my body. I also just wanted to bring up that I avoided changing rooms when I was shopping, especially this was more as a younger to mid-teenager. I was so terrified of trying something on and having it not fit. That was like one of my worst fears, so I just would never try on anything at stores. I would just buy things and hope that they'd fit, and if they didn't, I'd just return them. But I couldn't stand the thought of having to admit that I was too big or that, you know, I couldn't fit into a size that I wish I could fit into. And that definitely led to a lot of insecurity and just emotional frustration, especially with my mom. I think that she was doing her best to try to support me and let me get clothes that were going to make me feel confident. I remember one instance where I was at Topshop with my mom when I was probably like 13, and at least at that time, Topshop sizing notoriously ran quite small, so a size like 27 jean would fit a lot smaller than the typical size 27 jean. So I remember getting my size jean that I thought would fit, like what would normally fit, going into a changing room, like putting on my brave face to try on these pair of jeans, putting them on and having it totally not fit, and just feeling absolutely awful, like about to break down in tears. And it was just so terrible, and I felt so low. So yeah, even like little things like changing just became so stressful for me and so triggering. And near kind of the midpoint of high school, I think around grade 11, I started developing really unhealthy eating habits, mostly of restricting and then binging. So I would skip meals, especially when people wouldn't notice. So like I would just not have lunch at school, or I wouldn't have breakfast, things like that, where it wasn't obvious to the people around me. And then obviously it would get to a point of me craving all these foods and needing to eat, and then I would eat a lot of food. I'd have a really, really big meal and feel awful afterwards. So I definitely really struggled with finding a balance, and it just kind of got worse and worse. And I reached my lowest weight probably since I'd hit puberty on Christmas 2019. And I remember I didn't really weigh myself much because our scale was in the basement at home, and I just was always kind of scared of seeing the number. But I was at my grandparents' house and I stepped on their scale and I saw the number, and I was almost surprised my weight was that low, just considering that I never thought I would get to a number that I had hoped to get to. But even though I was at this weight that I thought I would be happy at, I definitely wasn't. I emotionally was probably at one of the lowest points I've ever been in my life. I was feeling quite depressed and struggling with a lot of pressure and stress from my university auditions, schoolwork, this program that I was running called Encounter at my school. There was just so much going on. I had so much work to do. So I felt like if I was skinny or smaller than what my body typically was, it would somehow magically help me cope with all these things. But it really just did the opposite, and it put so much more stress on me emotionally. And I honestly don't know what would have happened if there hadn't been a pandemic and things had gone on as normal. I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if I had just kept restricting and restricting and restricting myself. And I think it probably would have gotten to an even worse point than it was already. And I think it's important to note also that people were commenting on my body around that time where I was at my lowest weight. People were saying that I looked good, that I clearly was like thinner than I had been. And so it was so hard for me to admit to myself that I wasn't doing what was right for my body, because I knew that people were looking at me not knowing what I was going through and thinking that I was healthier than I'd ever been, even though that was exactly the opposite of the actual situation. And as I'm going to get into more later, weight and health have no direct correlation, and skinny people are not necessarily healthy and larger people are not necessarily unhealthy. Yeah, I think it was quarantine that really helped me develop a better relationship with food and with my own body, just because I did have time to put effort into my meals, to cook more, and I did slowly try to start doing more exercise. I never got into a super consistent routine, but I definitely tried to spend more time outside and just moving my body, which was a step up from how I was before. And it was really fun being able to explore a healthier lifestyle and a balanced lifestyle, eating 3 meals a day, and knowing that even if I did gain some weight back, that nobody was going to see me anyways, at least below like my neck, because I was just doing Zoom school classes. So it was definitely a time for me to kind of reset and repair my relationship with myself. And then by the time I got to summer, I was definitely the most confident version of myself I had been in a long time. Ironically, I went through a really tough breakup at the beginning of summer in June with my long-term high school boyfriend, which was definitely difficult for a little while. But once I kind of got over that after like a week and a half of feeling shitty, I definitely felt like I was able to regain some confidence, and I kind of rallied around my friends and we all lifted each other up emotionally and just supported each other a lot. I was able to go shopping and appreciate these experiences that I hadn't been able to have during the first lockdown. And I even tried on clothes and in fitting rooms, and I wasn't afraid to admit if something was too small or just didn't fit right. I wasn't afraid to ask for different sizes, which I know for a lot of people it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me it was like a huge step up and a huge deal, considering that only a few months before I would feel so just disgusting and uncomfortable in a changing room looking at myself that way. And I even wore a bikini for the first time in public, probably since I'd hit puberty. I always would avoid wearing two-piece bathing suits anytime I went to a pool or a beach, especially in my mid-teen years. I just felt so uncomfortable, so I would always wear a one-piece or just avoid wearing a bathing suit altogether, even though I'd love to swim, and that was just one more instance of me letting my body image take over my life. That was a really big deal for me, and it was the first time I felt confident to have a friend take bikini photos of me, and like I posted them on Instagram and felt really confident in myself, even though I didn't necessarily look exactly like a size 0 Instagram model. And then after the summer, I guess we're getting into closer to my present day self. It was hard moving to Toronto for sure, and I definitely did gain weight. The freshman 15 is very real, and it's hard, especially in the residence that I'm in, because our dining hall is really small and we only really have one meal option per meal. So there's no choice, and I can't say one day that I want to have a salad or one day I want to have X food or whatever I'm craving. It kind of just comes down to whatever they make that day. So it's hard for me to regulate how much food I'm eating or how healthy I'm eating, which is why I'm really looking forward to moving out of res and being able to cook more for myself next year. And at this point, I'm just trying to develop a better relationship with food and exercise and just my body image in general. I've been really enjoying stepping up my fashion game in Toronto, and I'm starting to try to not feel guilty about how an outfit makes me look and think more about how it makes me feel. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that I've reached this perfect point of loving myself and thinking that my body is perfect and never having bad days. I definitely still struggle with my eating habits, and it's sometimes still difficult for me to convince myself to eat 3 meals a day, but I'm definitely in a place now where I can recognize that any sort of desire to restrict myself is not healthy and is just going to put me in a bad place in the long run. So I'm just trying to support myself the best I can and get to a point where I'm not afraid to wear what I want and eat what I want and just be confident with the person I am on the inside without having my physical appearance reflect any sort of value of who I am. So that was my story. I know that was quite long, but I feel like I really wanted to get everything out there and just paint a full picture of my experience. And I think that, you know, a lot of people go through similar things and never actually get to talk about it with anyone. And I really haven't opened up to many people about my experiences with eating and body image. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to do that today. And now I just want to get into some statistics, things that worry me and things that I hope to see change in the future. So according to the Canadian government, this was published in 2010, a third of young people at a healthy weight feel like their body is not the right size. According to the British Mental Health Foundation in 2019, a third of British teenagers feel ashamed about their body image. 40% of teenagers said that images on social media have caused them to worry about their bodies. More than a third of British teens have stopped eating at some point or restricted their diets as a result of worrying about body image. 40% of teens said that things their friends have said have made them worry about their body image. And 35% of teens worry about their body image often or every day, and 37% of teenagers feel upset and ashamed in relation to their body image. I mean, I'm just going to say what we're all thinking right now, probably. This is very fucked up and not okay and heartbreaking and sad, and I can definitely relate to a lot of these. And even part of me was expecting the numbers to be higher. Obviously, they didn't survey the entire population, just a sample size, but it's just so upsetting to know that so many people are out there thinking that they're never going to be good enough just because of the number that they see on their pair of jeans or their shirt, or just because of the size of their waist or their chest or their hips. This is not okay at all. And I'm really happy that today in 2021, we have a lot more representation of plus size models in the industry. There's plus size influencers and definitely a lot more diversity in what we see online. But for me personally, as a person who typically wears between a size 6 and a size 8 in most clothing, I would really love to see more mid-size models and influencers, people who look like me, because I really do think that there are a lot of us out there, and it's really hard when you feel like you have to either be in the camp of super thin, traditional, like size 0, size 2, or in the camp of plus sized. So I think that there is definitely room for mid-sized people. At the end of the day, we are like the middle of the scale and the middle of the size range. So you'd think that there would be just more representation of us. As I touched on earlier, your weight does not equal your health. I think we're improving on this perception today, but there's still a lot of negative stigma that somebody who is larger, somebody who wears larger sizes is not healthy or isn't doing enough to alter their state of their bodies, and somebody who's thin is healthy. This is just not the case, and it's really definitely, I think, fueling a lot of eating issues and body dysmorphia. When you look at a thin person who may be struggling from an eating disorder or a really bad relationship with food and with their body, and telling them that they're super healthy and that they're looking like the ideal, that's just going to drive them further and further down the drain of destroying their body with negative habits. And if you look at somebody who wears larger sizes but eats healthy and works out, and it ultimately just comes down to the fact that they're genetically going to be wearing a bigger size because their hip bones are larger or their body is built in a larger way, and telling them that they're unhealthy just because of the way they appear, you're going to be driving them to stop taking care of their body, because why would they if they're just going to constantly get criticized no matter what they do for their own internal health? So that's my rant about that. And I guess the last thing I just want to say is that literally anyone can have body image issues, eating disorders, or problems with food, no matter what their gender or size is. You don't have to look a certain way to be diagnosed with an eating disorder or have a negative perception of your body image. And although I think that women are traditionally the most recognized as people who have body image issues, literally anybody, whether you're a cis man or woman or a trans man or woman or a non-binary person, literally anybody can have body dysmorphia, can feel insecure. It definitely does not come down to your gender identity or your size. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really appreciate it, and I hope that hearing my story was empowering to you and that you feel like you can open up about any struggles that you might have had with your body image or your eating habits. If you do feel like you're struggling and you've gone through some of the things that I've gone through or things that have been harder than what I've gone through, I would seriously recommend that you reach out to a professional counselor or therapist or someone who you trust and open up to them about that, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel and there are better ways to take care of your body that are healthy and sustainable, and having unhealthy eating habits or being negative about your body is literally not going to help anyone, least of all yourself. So please, please, please reach out if you need it, and know that I'm here for you 100%. And if you ever feel the need to rant, feel free to DM me on Instagram at LadyLassPod. You are all so, so loved. And just a heads up, next week there will be no new episode because I have my recital next Sunday, and I'm going to be super busy preparing for that this week, so I just didn't want to have the extra stress of needing to put out a podcast episode. I just don't have enough time to plan one, and I don't want to put out any half-assed content for you guys. So you can use that time to catch up on any episodes you haven't listened to yet, or to listen to the playlist that I made with Jenny last week with all of our favorite classical, pop, rock, alternative, jazz artists. all in one place. And you can find that link in the last episode's description, or you can search up I Made a Podcast, and now it has a playlist by Charlotte Anderson on Spotify or Apple Music. I hope that you have a lovely day wherever you are, and I will talk to you guys again in a couple weeks. As always, check out Lady Laz Pod on Instagram to contribute for the next episode or share your thoughts on this episode. I would love to have you as part of this community, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!